Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Fairdinkum Radio. My name is Leon Piddard and I am your host. We are broadcasting from the land down under in Australia. Well, our next conversation is regarding a media release. The media release has been put out by Therese Mackay. I have had Therese Mackay on the program before to talk about the circumstances leading to the death of her husband, Don Mackay, back in 2007. Since 2007, Therese and her two daughters, Melissa and Alison, have been endeavouring to uncover the exact events that led up to Don's passing away. Since that time, they have approached politicians of both persuasions, sadly to no avail. Therese did publish a book called Without Due Care, which outlined the events leading up to and the death of her husband, Don. In the foreword, I read that medical negligence is a subject that no one wants to talk about until it happens to them. It is made all the worse for affected families because Australia's health system is saturated in cover-ups. A system so ruthless, it does not matter if trusting patients end up dead. And that was by Lorraine Long, the founder of the Medical Error Action Group. Every year, thousands of people lose their lives through medical error, and it is a subject that the authorities do not like to talk about. And out of exasperation and frustration, Therese has released a media release. Health Minister Skinner and Deputy Premier Stoner give the okay for medically caused death of disabled in New South Wales. It appears that the New South Wales Health Minister Skinner and Deputy Premier Stoner support human rights abuse leading to death of a disabled man, Don Mackay, by their weak response to questions on notice by John Kay, MLC. They have given approval to the shocking treatment and death of one of the most vulnerable in our society. In New South Wales, the disabled can be killed by gross medical negligence and there is no one to stand up for them. Except for us, ladies and gentlemen, we are the voice of the common people, and I'm glad to welcome Therese along. Therese, welcome to Fairdinkum Radio again.
Well, thank you very much, Leon. Thanks for covering us. It's much appreciated.
Well, that is our privilege and our pleasure. Now, the events that led up to your husband's death, we outlined in an interview we did just over 12 months ago, and I'd encourage our listeners to go there to Without Due Care, where we went through all of the different things leading up to it. But what I'd really like to deal with in our conversation today is, following Don's death, what was the initial follow-up to authorities or the political class? What was your first point of call, if you like, calling for an investigation into what was clearly medical negligence leading up to his death?
Well, I went through all the channels like the Healthcare Complaints Commission, the Ombudsman, every official body I could, and I made a lot of noise locally, and I contacted Andrew Stoner, who was the deputy leader of the opposition at the time, the National Party leader, and also the member for Oxley. And I was on the border of that electorate. So, and he contacted me and he supported me, had me down in Parliament House when he was asking questions, and from then on until election time 2010, he was extremely supportive. And I really appreciated that at the time because I didn't have any other voice or anyone else who would do anything.
So you had hope that Andrew Stoner, being the person in opposition at the time, and by all the communications that he had with you, that there was hope that there was going to be some sort of investigation. In fact, I read from an email correspondence to yourself dated 9th of October 2007, where he said, Therese, obviously the Yemma government is doing all it can to keep the inquiry and complaints handling in-house. We, the opposition, will seek next week to establish a parliamentary inquiry via the upper house. In the meantime, I'll ask Julian Skinner if she has any advice to give you. Now, there were several other emails that followed, but all along the same line, that they were committed to developing this parliamentary inquiry into the medical negligence leading up to Don's death. However, now he's in government, it's a different story.
Yes, there were a series of questions there, probably a little bit too long to read all the questions sent to Mr. Stoner by John Kay. And Mr. Stoner's answer was, it's very short actually to all these questions, and they were about the independent inquiry that he was going to establish or talking about. And his answer was the Deputy Premier has attended functions and publicly expressed support for the Mackay family for many years. And then he just hands over, this matter falls within the portfolio responsibilities of the Minister for Health and all correspondence is referred accordingly. So I think it's a bit of the bum's rush, actually.
Yes. Well,
he's just dropped it.
I will read those questions out, but first of all, I'd like to play a clip here from Andrew Stoner at your actual book launch, where he was audibly and demonstrably supportive of what you were trying to achieve by the book. So just hold on there. We'll just listen to this clip now.
Thank you, Pete, to Therese and your girls, ladies and gentlemen. I'm thrilled to be here on this special day. Look, I've known Therese and formerly her husband Don for a number of years. They've been passionate local advocates about issues of importance to the people of Hastings. But a little while ago, I got to know Therese even better, and that followed the tragic death of her husband Don. Since then, I've come to appreciate Therese as a woman who is extremely courageous, who is also tenacious, and who I think is highly principled as well as determined. I've seen her take on the bureaucracy. I've seen her take on the might of the New South Wales government. I've seen her stand out on the street with petitions in the heat for hours and hours on end in an effort to have the truth told regarding the circumstances of Don's tragic passing. And at every step of the way, the government has done their best to have this story not told. But Therese, being as she is, courageous and tenacious and principled and determined, has made sure that the story is told. And in this book, the story, it's a compelling read. It's a love story. It's a story of passion and emotion, of a family affected by tragedy. But most importantly, it's a story that tells the truth. It's a story that needs to be told about medical error, about the consequences of that, because unless the story is told, there will be other victims of the system, and the system will not improve. And that's why Therese and her friends and her family have pushed so hard and given so much of themselves through what must have been a most difficult period of time. So, Therese, can I congratulate you on this outstanding book. If you haven't got one, get one, read it. It'll make you laugh, it'll make you cry, it'll make you wonder why. Thank you.
So there he is, Andrew Stoner, in opposition at your book launch, and basically said that this was a medical error and it was a story that had to be told. And he, as I pointed out in an earlier email, he said that the Yemma government was purposely trying to cover up. And as I point out in the foreword to your book from Lorraine Long from the Medical Error Action Group, that the Australia's health system is saturated in cover-ups, a system so ruthless it does not matter if trusting patients end up dead. And the story we are talking about, ladies and gentlemen, is of Don Mackay, a disabled man who really spent 36 days in agony prior to his death, and Therese has been endeavouring to fight for a investigation into the events that led up to it. And John Kay did ask Andrew Stoner the following questions recently in Parliament, where, number one, did the Deputy Premier in 2010 attend or host a launch at Parliament House for the book Without Due Care, written by Mrs Therese Mackay, which details the circumstances of care that directly led to the death of her husband, Don Mackay? Following question, did the Deputy Premier express support for an inquiry as called for by the Mackay family, either at this event or at another time, to investigate the circumstances at the Royal North Shore Hospital that led to the death of Mr Don Mackay? If so, what steps has the Deputy Premier taken to establish such an inquiry now that he is in government? Number 3, has the Deputy Premier received any correspondence from Mrs Mackay since the coming in office on the possibility of establishing the inquiry? And if so, how has the Deputy Premier responded? Therese, you've got no satisfaction at all, despite the fact that he was positive about an inquiry prior to coming in government.
Oh, he was so supportive. I mean, I know I'm old enough to know that they do change when they get in, but I actually thought he was a good man. So I've learned a lesson, I suppose.
Well, this is actually, this story really is a lesson for the common people to understand that the political class cannot be trusted, is that their word is not worth honour. And what we are dealing with here is a man of honour, being your husband, who gave his life to community efforts, indeed in encouraging the type of social paradigms in our community where people like himself and more others were cared for, and yet this care does not extend to the political class once they get in power, because this is a very hard subject. I mean, thousands of people die every year from medical negligence, and now they're in a position of power. Obviously, they want to turn away from it. It's in the too hard basket, Therese.
Yes, exactly. And I think in our case, in the case of many, and as you get into this, we join up a bit. There's a network starts to form. People, elderly people and disabled people in Australia and in a lot of the world are being basically killed in hospital, and it's becoming more and more common, unfortunately. There's like a futile care is another word they use in America. It's almost a duty to die, and Don, I think, was treated as badly as he was because his life was not seen as worth living, and that's, to me, that's awful. That's an awful crime.
You're absolutely right, and there is an ideology present in this world amongst some of the ruling class in different areas of society where disabled people, elderly people are really regarded as a burden on society because they are no longer productive. Therefore, the care that is given is equivalent to what I guess they are giving back to society in the eyes of the technocratic class that are interested in the economics of the world, if you like, and society. And this goes back to the study of eugenics, which we have documented here. But and I mean, it does not mean that all of the people that take part in this are actually fully complicit or fully knowledgeable about what this is going on, but it is really an attitude, and this it is propagated through the scientific medical cartel, if you like, at the upper levels of society. And Therese, you experience this. I mean, let's talk about some other people you have appealed to in positions of power that could have made a difference but have ignored your pleas.
Oh, I before John Kay asked these questions, I sent out my material to every single state politician, and John Kay was the only one who responded. Over the years, I'm trying to think of who I've actually. I don't think there's anybody. I've even gone to the people that represent people with spinal injuries, and the lack of interest in they're all very good at getting out there and telling people what they can do, like climb Mount Everest or something. But when it comes to advocating for one of the people who's supposed to represent, nobody's interested. It's like there's a gloss being put over the whole. The more government funding these advocacy bodies seem to get, the less accountable they are, which is it's a worrying thing because we were going in another direction in the 1980s and it's turned in a very sour direction right now. I mean, what happened to Don was so bizarre. Every single time a right turn should have been made, a wrong turn was made. And yes, he was a good subject for research. I'm aware of that. A lot of disabled people are good subjects for research, and it's dirty research. And there's big dollars in research, and I've basically proven that a lot of his, I won't call it care, a lot of his treatment was based on research. But nobody wants to hear about that because it's too uncomfortable for people.
A lot of the activities that were conducted on him prior to his death were obviously experimental from what you witnessed. And, I mean, you know, I asked the question which I think we asked last time. If Don was a well-known sports person that had an accident and ended up, 36 days in agony, obviously there would have been an inquiry. All of the media would have been over it. But because Don was a disabled person, it is looked upon as though, well, he was going to die anyway. It's almost like he's collateral damage, so we're not going to really pursue this. And this is obviously the sentiment that has come through a lot of the communications to you, Therese. As Andrew Stoner pointed out in that initial book launch, that you are determined and tenacious, and most of the authoritarian class would have considered that you would have let this go by now, but for the sake of the honour of your husband and truth and integrity, you have continued to fight for an inquiry, specifically, not only regarding Don, the activities that were conducted on Don prior to his death, but a wider inquiry into the exposure of medical errors within the medical system.
Oh, exactly. But see, as well, I was there, and I'm not saying I did anything special. Most relatives are there. I was there the whole time except at night time because you have to sleep. I saw what they did to him, and I saw how afraid of some of them he was. He would physically flinch from some of them. He couldn't express himself. There were no communication devices in the hospital, modern hospital. But I didn't know what happened until I got the notes, and I actually put the notes together with what I saw. And actually, there were times when I was actually throwing up. It was so bad. You'd read a bit and then you'd think, this happened to my husband, this was done to my husband. And this saying you're going to die anyway, well, we're all going to die. That doesn't give anyone the right to kill us. If you're going to die tomorrow or 10 years down the track, it doesn't make your life any less worth living. That's just my attitude to it. And disabled people have even more right to care because we're supposed to be a civilised country. And civilised countries are supposed to look after the most vulnerable. That's what makes us civilised. But we seem to be going in the other direction, unfortunately.
Absolutely. Well, the base of our nation is based on really a Judeo-Christian outlook where we care for the most vulnerable and that we esteem them the most highly. Like if your parents are getting older and they are in your care, you look after them and they come first. And that's really, I'm just talking about the foundation of our society. But Therese, I wonder if you could just touch on I guess a couple of the major points of care or lack of care that took place prior to Don's death that really horrified you. I remember when you did share with us that at one stage his hands were tied down so that he could not remove the tubes that were going into his body because he knew that what they were actually doing to him was killing him, and yet they had restricted his movement so he could not remove them. Yes, we would when Melissa and I and Alison and a couple of other people, when we would be with him, we'd release his hands. But if we went away, their hands were then tied to the bed again, and it was horrible actually. There were times because he could move his arms, a little bit uncontrolled movement, but he could actually move his arms to put his arms over his eyes to keep the light out, which was on 24 hours a day over his head. It was like torture basically to see, and he was gagged so tightly. I've seen in other hospitals they have soft things around the mouth. He was gagged so tightly with the tubes in that he was bleeding at the corners of his mouth a lot. Yes, it's unbelievable.
We've gone through the actual details of what basically the physical suffering after. It was awful. He had Klebsiella pneumonia, which is called the drowning pneumonia, which is hospital-acquired, MRSA in his lungs, total body sepsis from MRSA, totally blown up with fluid, and to fight all these on top of all the drugs he already was taking. I've gone through the medication chart, and the amount of medication he's on was just mind-blowing to treat the things that came along later, if you know what I mean. So he was suffering terribly.
And even to the point that the talc that was used to pump into his lungs is no longer used, and it was really the wrong kind, if you like, and that the way that maybe just comment on that.
Yeah, when they did Don surgery, well, we thought it was only going to be a lung drain, but they did a thing called a pleurodesis, which is where they stick the pleural lining of the lungs. There's a little gap in between, and fluid had gathered there, and this pleurodesis is supposed to stick those two linings together so no fluid can gather. And they use a type of talc for it. Ungraded talc has got granules too small, and they don't use that mostly. It's cheaper. And the little granules can get out into the body and cause inflammation and basically cause the lungs to fail, which is what happened to Don. They don't use that anymore since they did it to Don, and I found out that this happened, and I sent the information to Royal North Shore, and they wrote back to me and said they will not be using it anymore. So they knew there was a problem with this product. To put it into a quadriplegic's lungs, that was... They knew what they were doing.
And even when they did suction his right lung, the fluid was to be removed, a gentle suction of 3 kPa. The Royal North Shore Hospital admit that the transcript error caused his lung to be suctioned at 10 times the value at 31 kPa, and he was left like that for almost 24 hours while not being spotted by the cardiothoracic doctors and the spinal unit's nurses until 8 a.m. the next day. So he was being suctioned, 10 times the rate he was supposed to be for 24 hours.
Well, his spinal outreach doctor, who used to, she came to Port Macquarie the year before. They do the rounds for spinal patients, and she was in touch, but I don't know where she was when we were down there. We didn't see her. She recorded a month previously that Don had a low threshold for drainage of effusions. So even the 3 kPa probably would have been too much for him. So it would have been a much more gentle than what you and I would have. But as far as that huge error, I didn't find out about that till 7 months later when I got the report from Royal North Shore. They accidentally put it in the report. I couldn't find it in the notes because the handwriting was so bad. And then when I found it, it stood out. But nobody was going to survive what they did to him. I mean, when they did surgery, I've had minor surgery done, as I mentioned, and you have a lot of procedures like ECG, bloods. You have a coagulation profile to see if your blood will coagulate. Don had none of that done before. What they didn't do to him before his surgery, if it was done out in the bush, it probably would have been done better. There was absolutely no pre-ops, and anyone in the medical world, they won't believe you when you tell them that. But I've listed them, but it's too long to read out here. There's so many dot points of what they didn't do before surgery. Every single pre-op that you should have wasn't done.
Well, on the night of his first respiratory arrest, he was calling for you for 3 hours, and according to his roommate, they did nothing. And you're only 5 minutes away, and yet you did not get called to come to his side. Now, you were his rock, you were his support, not only his wife but obviously his first carer, and that you did that with love and happiness because he was your husband. You wanted to care for him, and yet here he was in agony. Calling out for 3 hours, and yet they did nothing. And you could not, you weren't aware of this, but these things come to your knowledge after. And so as you've stated, some of these events didn't come to your knowledge till 7 months later. How long, what was the longest time after John's death that you were still realising, I guess, putting the jigsaw together of what really happened?
I don't think I even fully know what happened now. There's still things in the notes that I can't understand. Unfortunately, I can't afford to hire. I need to have a cardiothoracic person go through the notes because I can't understand a lot of the medical terms. But what I have understood, they denied, the Healthcare Complaints Commission, the Coroner's Office, Royal North Shore denied that Don had acute respiratory I have trouble pronouncing it, acute respiratory distress syndrome, which comes out of a failed pleurodesis. But in the hospital notes, over and over again, the cardiothoracic people have written down the short, it's called ARDS. They write the short thing, and they've done it in block letters all through the notes. And it's bizarre that it's written there in the notes that this is what he had, which is caused by the surgery. But these official bodies over and over again deny it, and because they deny it, that becomes the truth.
Yeah. That becomes a
I mean,
precedent.
I've seen it.
Yes. Now, one thing I'm interested in here, the Healthcare Complaints Commission and their role in all of this. You are the complainant of and the spouse of a deceased man, and the activities that were conducted on him need a thorough medical investigation, a parliamentary investigation, whatever investigation, whatever it is, it needs to be done. What I want to know is, here is a very authentic complaint from the wife, spouse, carer of a disabled man. I mean, the Healthcare Complaints Commission are very readily able to go after anyone that speaks against vaccines or any other natural sort of therapy that they don't like. What has been their response to you in this event?
The way their inquiry works is you make the complaint, they talk to the doctors, they make a decision. They don't come back to you. They make the decision as soon as they hear what the medical people say. So that pretty well tells you what, there's no chance. And then they offer you a thing called formal conciliation. And the health minister's pretty big on saying that I wouldn't take part in mediation. It wasn't called mediation. It was formal conciliation. If you take part in that, you sit around the table with them. You can't have a solicitor or anyone with you. You're not allowed to speak about anything that's said in that room afterwards. So you can't then, if you hear something the doctor has said, you can't talk about it outside. You can't even talk about it to your relatives.
So you're silenced. You're silenced in this conciliation process.
So most people won't take part in formal conciliation because if they get their heads up on it, I'll advise anyone not to take part in it because you'll have to be quiet after that. The Healthcare Complaints Commission's medical expert, and I've got it in writing, said that my husband would not have felt the pain of having his lungs suctioned at 10 times the amount for almost 24 hours because he was a quadriplegic. So therefore that was okay.
Yep.
He's only a quadriplegic.
So the Healthcare Complaints Commission is really, as Lorraine Long said, saturated. The health system, Australia's health system, is saturated in cover-ups. A system so ruthless, it does not matter if trusting patients end up dead. And at the end of your press release, you state that it was a death caused by gross negligence, ignorance, stupidity, arrogance, filth, and cost-cutting. All this can be done, and Health Minister Skinner says it's been thoroughly investigated by the Independent Healthcare Complaints Commission, who declared all the above and more acceptable. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there's about 15, 20 dot points here of absolute medical negligence. Therese finishes the press release by saying that, therefore, it is now acceptable in New South Wales to butcher the disabled, and no one is ever accountable. The Health Minister, Mr Stoner, and the Healthcare Complaints Commission are a disgrace. Please tell me that in today's civilised society there is somebody who will stand up to such shocking abuse of a disabled man which borders on eugenics. Therese, you're doing the right thing. I thank you. Thank you for joining us, and I thank you for continuing your fight to expose the absolute corruption and the medical negligence that exists in this country, which is continually covered up. Well, Therese, look, we're out of time, but I want to thank you for joining us and thank you for your pursuit of truth and honesty on this subject.
And thank you for covering it. I really appreciate it.